My name is Lauren Mitchell, I'm 30 years old, and I'm from a small town in Ohio. I'm writing this because I've carried something with me for a really long time, something that shaped who I am in ways I'm only beginning to understand. I guess this is my way of getting it out, in the hope that maybe it helps someone else who's been through something similar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Okay, here goes. When I was a kid, I thought I had the perfect family. We lived in this cozy little house at the end of a quiet street, the kind where everybody knew each other and the neighborhood kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Our house had this big maple tree out front, and in the fall, the leaves would turn the brightest red you can imagine. My dad would rake them into giant piles, and I'd take a running start and cannonball right into them, sending leaves flying everywhere. My mom would laugh and shake her head as she watched from the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. I remember thinking we were the kind of family other people probably envied. Every summer, we'd pack up the car and head to Myrtle Beach. We always stayed at the same little motel with the tacky seashell bedspreads and the pool that smelled way too strongly of chlorine. My dad would teach me how to build sandcastles that wouldn't collapse the second a wave hit them. He had a million tricks: dig a moat, pack the walls tight, use wet sand at the base. I thought he was a genius. Back home, weekends meant backyard barbecues. My dad manned the grill like it was serious business, flipping burgers and hot dogs while music played on the radio. My mom would make lemonade from scratch, like actual lemons, not the powdered stuff, and she'd cut up watermelon for me and my friends. There was always laughter, always people around, always this feeling that we were safe and happy and together. I was especially close to my dad. He called me his little star, because he said I lit up every room I walked into. He never missed a soccer game, even the ones where it was freezing and the wind made your ears ache. I'd look over at the sidelines and see him bundled up in his coat, cheering louder than anybody. When I struggled with math homework, he'd sit with me at the kitchen table, drawing diagrams and using coins or cereal pieces to help me understand. I could tell him anything. When kids at school were mean, when I had a bad dream, when I felt scared, he was the person I ran to. My mom was different. Don't get me wrong, she loved me. I know she did. But she always seemed tired. Like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. There were moments when she'd light up, like when we'd bake cookies together, or when we'd curl up on the couch and she'd read me Charlotte's Web for the 10th time because I loved it so much. But mostly, she seemed distant, like her mind was always somewhere else. I used to tell myself that moms were just like that, busy, stressed, thinking about important grown-up stuff. Looking back now, I can see the signs that things weren't as perfect as I believed. I just didn't want to see them at the time. It started small. Little things. At night, I'd sometimes hear them arguing. Their voices were low at first, just murmurs behind closed doors. I'd pull the blankets over my head and try to block it out, telling myself they were probably just talking about boring adult things like bills or chores. But as I got older, around 10 or so, the fights got harder to ignore. Their voices got louder, sharper. I'd hear my mom's voice tremble, hear my dad sigh in that way that said he was trying to stay calm but struggling. And during the day, there were these long, cold silences. We'd all be in the same room, but it felt like we were miles apart. My dad would be reading the paper, my mom flipping through a magazine, and I'd be sitting there with this knot in my stomach, not understanding why it suddenly felt so heavy in the room. There were other clues too, though I didn't see them for what they were back then. Like how my mom would sometimes look at my dad when she thought I wasn't paying attention, this look that was part sadness, part anger. Or how my dad started staying late at work more often, coming home after dinner instead of before. But I clung to the good moments. The times we went to the county fair and rode the Ferris wheel together. The nights we'd make popcorn and watch movies. The mornings when my dad would drive me to school and we'd blast the radio, singing along to songs we both loved. I convinced myself that those happy moments were what mattered, that they meant everything was okay. I think, deep down, I knew something was changing. But I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that my perfect family wasn't so perfect after all. I remember one night especially clearly. It was winter, and there was a storm blowing outside. The wind was howling, and the branches of the big maple tree scraped against my window. I woke up to the sound of my parents' voices, angry, hurt, louder than usual. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. I sat in my bed, frozen, listening. When the shouting stopped, I waited for the usual. My dad's soft voice, my mom's quieter sobs. But that night, there was nothing. Just silence, except for the storm outside. The next morning, they acted like nothing had happened. My dad made pancakes. My mom hummed while she poured coffee. But I could feel it, the crack in the foundation. The way they wouldn't look at each other, the way the air felt charged, like a storm still brewing beneath the surface. That's the thing about being a kid. You see more than people think you do. You feel it, even if you don't have the words for it. And I felt it, that shift, that tension, that invisible wall growing between them. I kept telling myself it would pass, that they'd get through it, that families fight sometimes, but love wins out in the end. I didn't know then how much that belief would be tested. Or how much those early memories, those maple leaf piles, those beach trips, those backyard barbecues, would one day feel like echoes of a world that no longer existed. And that's where it all began. The perfect family I thought I had, the cracks I tried so hard to ignore, and the weight of words I would carry with me for decades to come. If you're still here, thanks for listening. It means more than I can say. And if any of this sounds familiar, if you grew up watching your perfect family fall apart, I hope you know you're not alone. Let me know your thoughts below, and don't forget to share where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I always love hearing your stories too. The cracks that I had tried so hard to ignore became impossible to look past when I was around 11. It was like the walls of my safe little world had started to crumble, slowly at first, then all at once. The soft murmurs of my parents' arguments that used to drift under doors and fade into the night became loud, sharp, impossible to block out. Their words, once careful and restrained, started to come out like knives, cutting through the quiet of our home. I remember the first time I heard a dish shatter. It was a Saturday night, and I had been in my room reading, trying to lose myself in a story because the tension downstairs had felt especially heavy that day. I don't even remember what set them off that time. Maybe it was money, maybe it was about my dad working late again, maybe it was nothing at all, just the weight of everything unsaid finally cracking open. I heard my mom's voice rise, then my dad's, then the unmistakable sound of ceramic hitting tile and exploding into pieces. I froze. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I remember creeping down the hallway, peeking around the corner and seeing the aftermath. My mom standing in the kitchen, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face, and my dad standing at the other end of the room, his face pale, his mouth a thin line. The plate, or what was left of it, lay scattered across the floor in jagged pieces. Nobody noticed me watching. And maybe that was the first time I felt truly invisible in my own home. After that, it became normal in the most heartbreaking way. Fights would flare up over dinner, in the mornings before school, in the dead of night when the rest of the world felt asleep and safe. I'd hear doors slam, things knocked over, my dad's footsteps heavy as he went down to sleep on the couch. The couch became his refuge more nights than not. I used to get up quietly, tiptoe down the stairs, and see him there, sprawled out, still in his work clothes, one arm flung over his eyes like he couldn't bear to face the ceiling. Sometimes I'd stand there, torn between wanting to wake him, to tell him to come back upstairs, and knowing it wouldn't change anything. The hardest part wasn't even the fighting itself, it was what came after. The quiet. The silence that filled the house like a fog, thick and suffocating. The mornings when my parents wouldn't look at each other, when they'd pass each other in the hallway like strangers. My mom would make coffee without saying a word. My dad would gather his keys and leave for work without kissing her goodbye. I tried so hard to fix it. I thought maybe if I were better, if I were quieter, if I helped more, it would help them too. I'd set the table without being asked. I'd do my homework without complaint. I'd clean my room, take out the trash, anything to keep the peace. But it never seemed to matter. When my mom got angry, I'd go to my dad. It wasn't something I thought about, it was just where I felt safe. He'd pull me close, smooth my hair, tell me it was going to be okay. I clung to those moments like a lifeline. But even that started to backfire. My mom began to notice. The first time she said it, it was like a slap I never saw coming. I had run to my dad after they'd been fighting over something, I don't even remember what, and my mom looked at me with this mixture of exhaustion and bitterness and said, "Go to your father then, since you always take his side." It stung in a way I can't explain. I wasn't trying to take sides. I just wanted to feel safe. But after that, it became something she'd say more and more. When I'd sit with my dad on the couch, when I'd ask him for help with homework instead of her, when I'd laugh at one of his jokes. "Of course you're on his side. Why don't you go live with him if you love him so much? You're just like him, you know." Each comment chipped away at something inside me. I started to feel like I was doing something wrong, just by loving my dad. Like I was betraying my mom every time I went to him for comfort. I began to second-guess everything. If I laughed at his jokes, would that make her mad? If I hugged him goodnight, would she feel hurt? If I talked about my day at school with him, would she think I didn't care about her? It was exhausting, walking on eggshells all the time. At school, I tried to keep it together. I didn't want anyone to know what was happening at home. But the anxiety followed me everywhere. I couldn't concentrate in class. I'd stare out the window, wondering if they'd be fighting again when I got home, if I'd hear something break, if tonight would be the night my dad left for good. I'd feel sick to my stomach at the end of the day, not because of anything at school, but because I didn't know what I was walking into at home. I started to dread weekends. I know that sounds strange. Most kids live for the weekend. But for me, it meant more time at home, more time for fights to happen, more time for things to fall apart. I'd lie in bed at night, listening for the first raised voice, waiting for the storm to start. I remember one Saturday morning when I woke up early. The house was quiet, too quiet. I went downstairs and found my mom sitting on the laundry room floor, surrounded by piles of clothes, crying. Not sobbing, not wailing, just this soft, broken sound, like she didn't have any energy left to cry harder. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. I wanted to go to her, to hug her, to tell her I was sorry for whatever I'd done to make things so bad. But I was scared. Scared that she'd push me away. Scared that I'd say the wrong thing. So I just stood there, until she noticed me and wiped her face, tried to smile, and said she was fine. But she wasn't fine. None of us were. I started staying late at school when I could. I joined clubs I didn't even care about, just to have an excuse not to go home right away. I'd tell my mom I had group projects, study sessions, anything to buy a little more time. When I did come home, I'd try to be invisible. I'd go straight to my room, turn on music, drown out whatever was happening downstairs. But no matter how hard I tried to hide from it, the tension seeped into everything. I felt it when I sat at the dinner table, when I did my homework, when I lay in bed at night. I felt it in the way my mom looked at me, like she was angry and sad and disappointed all at once. I felt it in the way my dad's hugs started to feel a little more desperate, like he was holding on to me because he didn't know what else to hold on to. Looking back now, I see that I was just a kid trying to survive in a house that didn't feel like home anymore. I wanted to make it better. I wanted to fix it. But I couldn't. And that's a truth that took me a long time to face. It's strange, thinking about those days now. The memories come in flashes, the sound of a slammed door, the sight of my dad asleep on the couch, the echo of my mom's words that cut deeper than any fight ever could. They shaped me in ways I'm still trying to understand. They taught me how to tiptoe through life, how to read a room before I spoke, how to keep my feelings locked up tight so I wouldn't make things worse. And in all of it, I felt so alone. Like I was the only kid in the world whose family was falling apart. Like everyone else had the happy home I was losing piece by piece. But I wasn't alone. I know that now. And if you've ever felt the way I did, scared, confused, caught in the middle, I hope you know that too. I don't think anyone ever forgets the exact moment their world changes forever. For me, it happened on a rainy Thursday night, a night that started like so many others had over the past few months, with tension hanging heavy in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. It had been one of those days that felt off from the start. I remember it because it had rained all afternoon, the kind of steady, relentless rain that made everything feel gray and small. I came home from school and the house was so quiet it made my skin crawl. No music playing in the kitchen, no clatter of dishes, no hum of conversation. Just silence. The kind of silence that tells you something is wrong before you even know what it is. I tried to go about my usual routine, put my backpack down, grab a snack, head to my room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in a little tighter that day. That something was building beneath the surface. Dinner was tense. My dad barely spoke. My mom pushed food around on her plate without eating much of it. I kept my head down, hoping that if I stayed quiet, if I just made myself small enough, I could somehow keep the peace. But you can't stop an earthquake by standing still. The fight started just after dinner. I heard it begin in the kitchen while I was upstairs pretending to do homework, the sharp rise of my mother's voice, the low rumble of my father's trying to calm things down. But it escalated fast. The words got louder, the accusations harsher. Finances. That was what kicked it off that night. I heard her yelling about bills, about how he wasn't doing enough, how she felt like she was carrying the weight of everything while he drifted further and further away. My dad's voice cracked as he tried to explain, tried to reason with her, but I could hear the defeat in it. Like he already knew where this was going, and there was nothing he could do to change it. Then came the words that made my heart stop. Maybe I should just go. I froze. My pencil slipped from my hand and rolled off the desk onto the carpet. I stared at the door, listening, hoping I'd misheard. But the argument continued, and I heard my mom's voice break, really break, as she said, "Maybe you should." Something in me snapped. I couldn't sit there anymore, couldn't pretend to focus on fractions and spelling lists while my family fell apart downstairs. I got up and crept down the hall, heart pounding in my chest, and peeked around the corner. My dad was standing by the front door, his shoulders slumped, his head in his hands. Then he turned and walked toward the stairs, toward me. I ducked back into my room, not wanting him to see the tears already brimming in my eyes. But a few minutes later, I heard him moving around in my parents' bedroom. Drawers opening and closing. The soft zip of a suitcase. That was when I knew. He wasn't just blowing off steam. He was really going to leave. I couldn't stay hidden. I couldn't let it happen without trying to stop it. I went to their room and pushed the door open. He was standing there, folding a shirt with hands that trembled just slightly, the suitcase half full on the bed. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Lauren," he said, his voice cracking on my name. I ran to him, the sobs breaking free before I could stop them. I grabbed onto him, wrapping my arms around his waist, holding on as tight as I could like maybe, if I just held on hard enough, he wouldn't go. "Please, Daddy, don't," I whispered. "Please don't leave." He dropped the shirt and hugged me back, so tight it almost hurt, one hand cradling the back of my head, the other rubbing slow circles on my back. "I don't want to, baby," he said. "I don't want to. Things are hard right now. But I'll see you soon. I promise I'll see you soon." I shook my head against his chest, not wanting to hear it. "No. Stay. We can fix it. We can fix everything." But even as I said it, I knew. I could feel it in the way his body shook with silent tears, in the way his voice sounded like it was breaking apart, piece by piece. And then the door burst open. My mom stood there, her face pale and tight, her eyes red from crying. She took in the scene, me clinging to him holding me like he was trying to memorize the feel of me, and something in her just snapped. "Of course," she said, her voice sharp and bitter. "Of course you're clinging to him." I looked up, my breath hitching. Her gaze burned into me, full of hurt and fury and something I didn't understand at the time but now know was heartbreak. "You always pushed him away from me," she said, her voice trembling with rage and grief. "You're the reason he's leaving." Those words hit me harder than anything I'd ever felt before. Harder than the fights, harder than the silence, harder than the sound of the suitcase zipper. I froze. The tears that had been streaming down my face stopped, like my body didn't know what to do anymore. I was the reason. The guilt settled in immediately, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced back over everything. Every time I'd run to him when she was mad, every time I'd laughed at his jokes, every time I'd hugged him when she was standing right there. Had I done this? Had I really driven him away? I pulled back from my dad, suddenly unsure, suddenly afraid to touch him, to look at him. "No, sweetheart," he said quickly, seeing the change in me. His voice was desperate, pleading. "That's not true. That's not true at all." But my mom had already turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. And I just stood there, staring at the floor, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My dad tried to reassure me, tried to tell me it wasn't my fault, that he loved me, that he'd be back soon, that nothing would change between us. But his words felt far away, muffled by the weight of what my mom had said. I helped him carry his suitcase to the door, my hands numb, my heart hollow. He kissed my forehead, told me again that he loved me, that he'd call, that I'd see him soon. And then he was gone. I closed the door behind him and stood there for a long time, listening to the rain hit the windows, the house so quiet now it felt like it might break apart completely. That night, I lay awake for hours, replaying everything in my head, over and over. Her words echoed louder than the storm outside, louder than my own heartbeat. "You're the reason he's leaving." And somewhere deep down, a part of me believed it. Believed that if I'd just done something differently, if I'd just been better, loved them both in the right way, balanced the impossible tightrope between them, maybe he would have stayed. It's a weight I carried long after the storm passed, long after the rain stopped, long after the suitcase was gone. And even now, all these years later, I can still feel it sometimes. That moment, those words, the night everything broke. The days after my dad left blurred together in a strange, hollow way, like life was happening around me but I wasn't really part of it. It felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's family falling apart, except I couldn't change the channel, and I knew the ending wasn't going to be happy. The house was too quiet, too big, and somehow darker. Even the sunniest mornings felt dim. My dad moved into an apartment on the other side of town. I remember the first time I visited, how strange it felt to see him in a place that didn't have any of the things I associated with him. The apartment was small and clean, but it didn't smell like our house. It didn't have the creak in the stairs or the dent in the kitchen table where I dropped a heavy book once. His new couch didn't have the worn spot where I used to curl up next to him to watch movies. He tried so hard to make it feel normal. He'd smile and ask about school. He'd cook my favorite spaghetti and let me pick what to watch on TV. But there was always this invisible wall between us, like neither of us knew how to act anymore. I'd sit on that too-new couch and try to answer his questions, but everything felt stiff, like we were strangers playing the roles of father and daughter instead of just being them. And the whole time, in the back of my mind, her words echoed. "You're the reason he's leaving." It made every visit feel like a betrayal. I wanted to be with him, missed him so much it hurt sometimes, but I'd sit there thinking about my mom at home, probably sitting alone on the couch, probably angry or sad or both. I'd wonder if she was picturing me laughing at his jokes or giving him a hug, and I'd feel sick with guilt. At home, things didn't get easier. If anything, they got harder. My mom wasn't the same after he left. The warmth that had been in her, even in small doses, seemed to dry up. She became distant in a way that was harder to bear than if she'd just yelled all the time. She'd go through the motions, making dinner, doing laundry, but it felt mechanical, like she wasn't really there. And when she did speak, it was often laced with bitterness I didn't know how to handle. Once, when I asked if I could go to the movies with friends, she didn't even look up from the bills she was sorting. She just said, "Why don't you go live with your precious father if he's so wonderful?" The sting of it was immediate. I hadn't even mentioned him. But there he was, a ghost haunting every conversation, every decision I made. I tried so hard after that to be what I thought she needed. I cleaned my room without being asked. I brought home good grades. I stopped asking for things, stopped complaining, stopped pushing back when she was cold or distant or sharp-tongued. I thought if I could just be the perfect daughter, maybe she'd see how sorry I was. Maybe she'd forgive me for what she believed I'd done. But it was like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. The tension in the house never eased. The silences stretched longer. The passive-aggressive comments kept coming. And the harder I tried to fix it, the more invisible I seemed to become. School became the one place I could breathe a little, but even there, I wasn't really myself. I kept my head down, did my work, avoided getting too close to anyone. Especially other girls. It wasn't something I decided consciously, not at first. But I started noticing how I pulled away when someone tried to be my friend. I'd make excuses to skip sleepovers or parties. The idea of trusting someone enough to let them see what was really going on at home terrified me. And deep down, I think I worried that if I let another girl in, it would end the same way: hurt, anger, betrayal. I was friendly, sure. I smiled. I answered when people talked to me. But I didn't let anyone get too close. The risk felt too high. Instead, I poured everything I couldn't say out loud into my journal. Page after page of messy handwriting, tear-stained paper. I wrote about how much I missed my dad, how empty the house felt without him, how I wished I could go back to before that night. But every time I wrote about missing him, the guilt would creep in. What kind of daughter was I to long for the person who'd left? What kind of daughter felt safer at his apartment than in her own home? I'd fill pages apologizing to my mom in words I never spoke out loud. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. I'm sorry I loved him too much. I'm sorry I ruined everything. Looking back, I can see how much I was just a kid trying to carry the weight of problems that were never mine to solve. But at the time, I truly believed it was on me to make it right. I thought if I could just figure out the right way to be, I could bring him back, or at least make her happy again. But no matter how hard I tried, nothing changed. He stayed gone. She stayed distant. And I stayed caught in the middle, trying to love them both without falling apart myself. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the house settling, imagining I could hear his car in the driveway, hear his key in the door. I'd imagine what I'd say if he came back, how I'd beg him to stay this time, how I'd promise to do better, be better. But the driveway stayed empty. The key never turned. And slowly, I stopped believing that anything I did could change that. I started going through the motions, too. Smiling when I was supposed to, nodding at the right times, keeping my head down and my feelings locked away where no one could see them. It was easier that way. Safer. But even as I tried to build that wall around myself, the guilt was always there, just under the surface. A quiet voice reminding me that no matter what I did, I'd already failed in the most important way. And that's how I lived for years, caught between two people I loved, trying to make myself small enough, good enough, perfect enough to somehow undo what had been done. Never realizing that it was never really about me at all. By the time I reached my 20s, I had become a master of pretending everything was fine. To most people, I looked like I had it together. I went to college, held down jobs, smiled in photos, laughed at parties. But beneath that polished surface was a quiet, constant hum of fear, a fear that at any moment, the people I cared about would see through me, decide I wasn't worth their time and leave. It wasn't something I could put into words then. It was more like this weight I carried, invisible but heavy. I didn't talk about it, not even with the few people who tried to get close. I thought if I ignored it, if I focused hard enough on school, work, or anything else, it would just go away. But of course, it didn't. Friendships were where I first saw how deeply those old wounds had shaped me. I wanted to connect. I wanted so badly to have those easy, close relationships I saw other people enjoying. But whenever someone started to get close, especially other women, my mind would go into overdrive. I'd analyze every word, every glance, every tone. Was she annoyed with me? Was she talking about me behind my back? Did I say something wrong? It wasn't that my friends did anything to make me doubt them. It was me. I was always waiting for the moment it would all fall apart. Because that's what I'd learned to expect. That love, loyalty, closeness were fragile things, and sooner or later, I'd mess up and lose them. And so I kept people at arm's length without even meaning to. I'd make plans, but cancel at the last minute, too anxious to go. I'd laugh and joke, but steer the conversation away if it started to get too personal. When friends opened up to me, I'd listen, but rarely let my own guard down. And when friendships inevitably faded, because I wasn't giving them what they needed, I told myself it was for the best. Better to keep it shallow and safe than risk getting hurt. Romantic relationships were even harder. On the surface, I dated like anyone else. I met people through school, work, friends. I went on dates, had boyfriends. But there was always a wall between me and them that I didn't know how to lower. I'd pull away the second things started to feel real. If a boyfriend tried to get to know me on a deeper level, if he asked about my childhood, my family, my fears, I'd shut down. I'd change the subject, make a joke, or tell him I was tired and needed to go. And if he tried to get closer anyway, I'd find reasons to end it. Because deep down, I was terrified. Terrified that if I let someone really see me, the messy, scared parts, they'd leave. Just like I believed I'd made my dad leave. I told myself I was protecting my heart, that I was being smart, cautious. But the truth was, I was lonely. And the lonelier I felt, the more I convinced myself that I didn't deserve more. There were good people who tried. People who were patient, kind, who wanted to love me. But I didn't know how to let them. Every time, the same voice in my head whispered, "Don't get too close. Don't trust it. It won't last." The worst part was, I knew I was doing it. I knew I was pushing people away, but I didn't know how to stop. It was like watching myself from the outside, seeing the damage I was causing and feeling powerless to change it. Therapy was something I thought about often. I'd look up counselors online, read articles about healing childhood wounds, even start filling out intake forms. But I never followed through. I told myself I didn't have the time or the money, or that what I was dealing with wasn't bad enough to need professional help. The real reason was fear. Fear of facing everything I'd buried for so long. Fear that if I said it all out loud, the guilt, the shame, the loneliness, it would break me. And fear that even with help, I'd still end up alone. So I kept going the way I always had. I focused on work, on keeping busy, on being the person everyone thought I was. And inside, I kept waiting for the day I'd finally feel safe. The day I'd finally stop being the scared little girl who thought love was something she had to earn by being perfect. But that day didn't come. Not on its own. And eventually, I started to realize that maybe I couldn't outrun the past. Maybe the only way through it was to stop pretending it didn't matter. To stop pretending I was fine. I wish I could say I had some big, dramatic turning point, some single moment that made me see the light. But the truth is, it was quieter than that. Just a slow, growing understanding that I was tired of being afraid. Tired of keeping people at a distance. Tired of carrying guilt that was never really mine to begin with. And tired of living like I didn't deserve the kind of love and connection I'd always craved. I wasn't ready for therapy yet, not then. But for the first time, I started to think about what it might be like to let someone help me. To let myself be seen, even a little. And that tiny shift, just the thought that maybe I didn't have to do it all alone, was the beginning of something new. A slow, hard, messy beginning, but a beginning all the same. It wasn't a single moment that brought me to my breaking point. It was more like years of small cracks finally giving way under the pressure. But if I had to name the moment when I truly felt everything crumble, it was the night my last relationship ended. We'd been together almost a year. He was patient, kind, everything I could have wanted on paper. And yet, I had kept him at arm's length the entire time. I didn't see it at first. I thought I was doing what I always did, being careful, protecting myself. But that night, when we sat across from each other in my apartment, his words hit me harder than I expected. "You never let me in," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was just tired. The kind of tired that comes from trying for so long and finally realizing it isn't going to change. And I didn't have anything to say. Because he was right. He left that night, and I sat alone in my living room, staring at the door long after it closed. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, the weight of it all, the failed relationships, the loneliness, the guilt I'd carried for so long, finally became too much to bear. I felt hollowed out, like I had nothing left to give. That night, for the first time in my life, I let myself cry for real. Not the quiet tears I'd shed into my pillow when I was younger. Not the silent, controlled weeping that stopped before anyone could hear. This was deep, raw sobbing that came from a place I hadn't let myself feel in years. And when it was over, I felt empty, but also, in some small way, relieved. Like I had finally admitted to myself that I couldn't keep going like this. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. My hands trembled as I typed, "Therapists near me." This time, I didn't close the window after a few minutes. I didn't tell myself I'd come back to it later. I scrolled through profiles, found someone who seemed like a good fit, and sent the email. By the end of the week, I had my first appointment scheduled. Walking into that therapist's office felt like stepping off a cliff. I was terrified. Terrified of what would come out if I started talking. Terrified of being judged, of being told I was too broken to fix. But my therapist, her name was Allison, met me with warmth and compassion I didn't realize I'd been craving so deeply. In those first few sessions, I didn't even know where to start. I talked about work, about the breakup, about how I always felt like I was waiting for people to leave me. And then, one day, the words tumbled out. I told her about that night. The night my dad left. I described the fight, the suitcase, the way I clung to him and begged him to stay. And then I told her what my mom had said. "You're the reason he's leaving." I heard my own voice crack as I repeated those words. I felt the same wave of guilt and shame wash over me, the same crushing weight I'd felt all those years ago. But for the first time, I wasn't alone with it. Allison didn't flinch. She didn't look at me with disappointment or pity. She looked at me with kindness and said, gently, "That wasn't fair. That wasn't your burden to carry." I don't know why, but hearing someone else say it out loud, someone who didn't know me back then, who wasn't part of the mess, felt like lifting a veil I didn't even know I'd been hiding behind. We spent months unpacking that night, and everything that came after. I talked about the guilt, the way I'd tried to earn my mom's love by being perfect. I talked about the distance I'd put between myself and everyone else. I talked about how I'd been living in fear of repeating the same pattern. Little by little, therapy helped me see the truth. That my parents' marriage had been their responsibility, not mine. That my dad didn't leave because of me. That my mom's words were spoken in pain and anger, but that didn't make them true. And maybe most importantly, that I didn't have to keep punishing myself for something that was never my fault. There were hard days. Days when I left Allison's office feeling raw and exposed. Days when I wanted to retreat back into my old patterns because it felt safer. But I kept showing up. I kept doing the work, even when it hurt. And as I started to heal, I realized there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to talk to my dad. Not just to see him or catch up like we sometimes did. I needed to really talk, to ask the questions I'd been too scared to ask, to hear the answers I'd been avoiding. So I called him one afternoon and asked if we could meet. We sat in a quiet coffee shop, and for the first time, I told him what I'd been carrying all these years. I told him about that night, about what Mom said, about how I'd believed it for so long. His face crumpled with sadness as I spoke. And when I was done, he reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Oh, Lauren, I'm so sorry. I never knew you felt that way. I left because of things between your mom and me, things that had nothing to do with you. I loved you then, and I love you now. You didn't push me away. You didn't do anything wrong." Hearing those words from him felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. It didn't erase all the pain, but it helped. It helped more than I ever imagined it could. That conversation didn't magically fix everything. My mom and I still have a complicated relationship. I still have moments of doubt and fear. But I'm not carrying that same crushing guilt anymore. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not just surviving. I'm learning how to live, to connect, to let people in little by little. Healing isn't a straight path. It's messy and hard and full of setbacks. But I'm on that path now. And that's something I never thought I'd be able to say. At 30 years old, I often look back on the girl I used to be, the girl who stood frozen in the doorway as her dad walked out, clutching his suitcase, while the words of her mother echoed like thunder in her ears. "You're the reason he's leaving." That sentence shaped so much of my life, carved so deeply into my heart that for years, I couldn't imagine any other truth. But now, with time, therapy, and the hard work of facing those shadows, I see that girl differently. I see her with compassion instead of blame. Where I am now is not some magical place of perfect peace or complete healing. I don't think that's what healing really looks like. It's not about erasing the pain or pretending the past didn't happen. It's about learning how to live with it in a way that no longer controls you. It's about seeing the wounds for what they are, proof that you've survived, not proof that you're broken. I've learned to set boundaries, especially with my mom. That's been one of the hardest parts of this journey. For so long, I wanted her to acknowledge what she'd said, to understand how deeply it hurt me, to apologize. I clung to the hope that if she just saw it, if she just admitted it, it would make the pain go away. But the truth is, my mom is not capable of giving me that. I don't think she ever will be. When I've tried to talk about that night, about those words, she deflects or gets defensive. She'll say things like, "You're too sensitive," or, "That's not how I remember it." She'll change the subject, or worse, make it about how hard things were for her. For a long time, that made me feel invisible all over again. Like my pain didn't matter. Like I was asking too much. But therapy taught me something important. I can't control her responses. I can only control what I allow in my life. So I've drawn lines. I visit her, but I don't stay long if she starts to slip into old patterns of guilt-tripping or passive-aggressiveness. I love her, but I no longer twist myself into knots trying to earn her love or approval. I've learned that real love doesn't ask you to shrink yourself, to hide your truth, or to carry burdens that aren't yours. And when I feel that old pull, the need to fix things, to make her happy at my own expense, I remind myself, I am not that little girl anymore. I don't have to hold the family together. That was never my job. I'm also working on trusting others, and that's a slow process. There are still moments when I catch myself bracing for rejection, for betrayal. But I'm getting better at recognizing those fears for what they are, echoes of the past, not predictions of the future. I've started to build friendships where I can be myself, flaws and all. I've begun to open up more, to let people see me as I really am. It's terrifying at times, but it's also beautiful. There's a kind of freedom in honesty, in connection that isn't built on performance or perfection. In romantic relationships, I'm still learning. I still have moments where I pull back, where I feel that old instinct to protect my heart by shutting people out. But I'm learning to notice it, to pause, to ask myself what I'm really afraid of. And sometimes, I'm brave enough to let love in. Most importantly, I've learned to forgive my younger self. That has been the hardest forgiveness of all. I spent so many years blaming that girl for what happened, for not being enough, for somehow failing to keep her dad from leaving. Now, I see how unfair that was. She was just a kid. A scared, heartbroken kid who did the best she could in an impossible situation. She didn't push her dad away. She didn't break her family. And she didn't deserve the guilt she carried for so long. I try to be kind to her now, in my thoughts and in the choices I make. I try to honor her by living a life where love is chosen freely, not earned through suffering. If there's one thing I could say to anyone out there who's been in my shoes, who's been made to feel like they were the reason their family fell apart, it's this: you were just a kid. It wasn't your job to hold your parents together. It wasn't your fault that they couldn't make it work. And you don't have to keep carrying that weight. You deserve love that doesn't ask you to bleed for it. You deserve relationships where you can breathe, where you can be seen and accepted exactly as you are. And you deserve peace, not the kind that comes from keeping everyone else happy, but the kind that comes from knowing you're enough. I'm not done healing. I don't think I ever will be, not completely. But I'm in a better place. I'm stronger, softer, braver than I used to be. And every day, I'm learning that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to the person I've always been, the person I was before guilt and shame tried to tell me who I had to be. That's where I am now. Not perfect. Not finished. But finally, mercifully, free.